October 7th happens. I swear it was the next day, probably October 8th. There's a resolution on all of our desks condemning October 7th and just saying a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm like, okay, AIPAC had to write this resolution. Because one of the first lines was like, Hamas's unprovoked attacks. And I'm like, wait a minute, man. Like, see, so we're just going to start lying? Like, what do you mean unprovoked? They're living in apartheid.
It'll come as no surprise to you that I personally definitely shared the criticism of voting for the Iron Dome.
Yes,
So I
yes.
guess my question is, and I think a lot of people who are watching would wonder, why did you vote for it? And has your view of the Iron Dome changed today from when you did vote for that bill?
The Iron Dome is a representation and another weapon to use in continued apartheid, oppression, open air prison, occupation, and now the genocide, but ultimately the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The Israel lobby has, as usual, gone after any politician who challenges the bipartisan consensus on unconditional support for Israel. One of the recent casualties of their attacks was Representative Jamal Bowman of New York's 16th Congressional District, who the right wing of the Democratic Party successfully primaried earlier this year, backed by an unprecedented $14.5 million from AIPAC to defeat him. He joins me today to discuss what happened, his evolution on Palestine, his views on the Biden administration, and what comes next. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Jamal, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be with you.
So there's lots to get into here, but before we get into some of the details, I want to just give you the opportunity, you lost your primary election earlier this year in your New York City district. We all know that AIPAC came for you hard. They spent, I think, something like $14.5 million to unseat you. So just give us an idea, I guess, the sort of summary of what happened. How did you end up getting pushed out of your seat?
Yeah, summary. I guess I got to go back to probably 2019 to answer that question.
Please.
I served in this district for 10 years as a middle school principal, so very deeply rooted, knew the families well, the kids well. And I ran for Congress to fight for justice, freedom, and equality, right? And to fight for equity and to make sure my kids and families had everything they needed. My opponent at that time was Congressman Eliot Engel, who was probably the number one pro-Israel Zionist hawk in Congress for the last 30 years. And so, of course, I had to learn everything I could about Palestine and, what's been going on over there. And so after we beat Eliot Engel by 16 points in a district that was majority black, the lines were redrawn and 200,000 black people were taken out of the district. And so from that point on, it was a fight between myself and the pro-Israel lobby in the district, which is very, very strong and very, very organized. And so whether it was, co-sponsoring a bill or calling for an end to the occupation or most recently calling for a ceasefire, the fight started when I won in 2020 and it continued to now. And obviously, at this moment, with the genocide happening right in front of our faces on live stream, AIPAC needed to be very aggressive in coming after someone like me who was very outspoken. I mean, I was calling it, genocide in front of the White House in like November, you know what I'm saying, before it was even mainstream. And so, they came after me, you said 15 million. I mean, we saw numbers 20, 25 million, more money than has ever been spent in any congressional race ever to make sure someone like me doesn't speak up ever again. And so, we lost our seat, which is what it is. But, I didn't lose my voice. I didn't lose my vision. I didn't lose, my fight for justice, which will continue. And now the world is seeing AIPAC for who they are. I mean, many in the world have known that for a while. But my district now is much more plugged in to how freaking crazy it is that a particular special interest like that can come and remove a congressman who the district, especially when you look at the working class people and the black and brown people in the district, really, they really appreciated our work. And so, as I said, the fight continues, but that's kind of how it went down.
Yeah, and you talk about the redrawing of your district, which is kind of crazy because I mean, this was redrawn not by Republicans, but by the Democratic Party officials. It was basically like as racist gerrymandering as you can get. Like when you redraw a district to remove black voters that had a black representative and add white voters. So I'm just curious if you can address the fact that it was like your party that also came for you.
Yeah, and we fumbled the process along the way as well. And so I'll try to make a very long story short. So we drew original lines that went through the state legislature, passed the legislature, and was signed by the governor that kept the district majority black. So that happened. Then Republicans challenged in the
Wow.
courts. And I forget specifically what they challenged. I don't know if they challenged it as a gerrymandering or something else, but they challenged it, and they had to go through three levels of the courts, right? And so each level was a Democratic judge that supported the challenge. So they supported the challenge. It was appealed to the next level, appealed to the next level. So all of the Democratic courts sided with the Republicans, and then ultimately a Republican special master redrew the lines. And so that's what happened in the first iteration. And by the way, these judges were appointed by a Democratic governor, Cuomo, back in the days. That was the first
Mm.
iteration. Democrats challenged in 2022, challenged after the 2022 cycle to change the lines again because the process was so jacked up. Democrats
Mm.
won that challenge. So the commission was reformed, the redistricting commission was reformed, and the new chair of this commission who was appointed is the deputy county executive to the county executive who ultimately challenged me. So he was charged with redrawing the lines. He didn't change the lines at all. As a matter of fact, they were trying to put more pro-Israel individuals into the district, and didn't change the lines at all. Kept the black people out, and ultimately we went on to lose. So it was just this crazy sort of, in my opinion, corrupt, behind the scenes, sort of underhanded, not listening to community at all. They say, oh, we want community input. Black people organized like hell to make sure the district stayed majority black. So last thing I want to say on this is this. District never had a black rep ever in history. For 30 years, it was represented by Elliot Ingold, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist.
Mm.
Soon as they get a black rep, 200,000 black people are taken out, and it's no longer a black majority district. That shit is crazy.
That
And
is
that's what we got
insane.
to continue to organize and fight against.
Yeah, that's insane and like just a bipartisan racist
Yeah,
attack.
the bipartisan BS, right? And that, to your point, and I'll let you ask your question, but you just got me hype right now.
Please.
We've been, Democrats, I'll say Democrats, are trying to, engage in this, false bipartisan governance for our liberal democracy. And Republicans have no interest in that, number one. And even Democrats, especially those controlled by big money and politics and special interests, they don't really have an interest in it either. They have an interest in their own power. And so while we're playing this fake game, the majority of the American people see right through it, don't trust the entire system, and as the recent results show, really don't trust Democrats. So we got a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to get more into that. But I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about why you ran in the first place in 2020, because, you were a middle school principal. I assume you were running to represent people in New York City and domestic, and to try to get, to try to change things domestically. But you kind of got forced into the foreign policy realm. But I'm just curious, explain to our audience why you ran in the first place.
Yeah, to make sure my kids had food security and affordable housing and fully funded public schools and economic opportunities and development. Just to make sure my kids was good, make sure they had health care, access to mental health, all about my students, all about the families I served, all about like the community in which I served. When you drive through the district, it's like America. It's actually like the world, right? So when you're driving through black and brown communities, there's abject poverty, there's a lack of resources, there's over policing, all those things in the black and brown communities. In the white communities, there's wealth, there's resources, there's opportunity. So I ran to really address that issue head on, the issue of racial and economic justice, and I'm going to continue to address that issue and fight for that issue. But to your point, no, I mean, foreign policy was, you know, not really at the top of the agenda, and it wasn't at the top of the agenda for the district, right? Like the, you know, the pro-Israel lobby in the district made Israel the top of their agenda, but for the rest of the district, majority black and Latino, black and brown, Arab, etc., it was more about the local issues, and so we ran for the local issues and ended up, you know, becoming an important voice for Palestine along the way.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's talk about Palestine now. And I've got some probably easy questions and a couple tough questions. So I
Okay.
just want you to like walk me through your evolution on this issue because look, I was born into a Lebanese family in the US. And I grew up my whole life understanding Palestine because of my family background. So it's something I've known my entire life. I imagine I don't know what you knew or didn't know, but I imagine you kind of got forced to do a Palestine 101, having to run against
Yeah.
someone like Elliot Engel, which my God, I forgot that guy existed, by the way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, immediately you're in Congress and you're automatically, getting forced to take positions on this issue because that's what happens in Congress. So, tell me, what did you know about Palestine before entering Congress? And then maybe we can maybe talk about how maybe some of your views might have stayed the same or shifted. But yeah, what did you know before going into
Yeah.
Congress?
What did I know? I knew something was going on there. Like that's it. Like I knew, I knew that something was happening there, and it was unjust. That's what I knew, pretty much. And that was it. When I started running, is when I really started to do my homework a bit. And so I would describe my evolution as the more I learned, the more outspoken I became.
Mm,
Right. So the more I learned about it, the more I familiarized myself with what was going on there. And I'll give you, a couple of examples. So when I first started running, I was like given talking points, right? And talking points that I kind of agreed with, right? Like, I support Israel's right on its face. Let's not talk about right now, but like 2019, just learning on its face, here's the talking points. Israel
mhm,
right to exist, Israel's right to defend itself. I support a two-state solution. Talking points, right? Now, as I started to meet more people and have different conversations, and also in terms of my own just common sense and critical thinking, well, if Israel has a right to exist, that must mean Palestine has a right to exist, right? If Israel has a right to defend itself, that must mean Palestine has a right to defend itself, right? Um, you know, if we talk about a two-state solution, like what's up with the other state? Like, why don't we have a two-state solution, right?
That's a good
And
question. Yeah.
so, you know, and then I learned about, okay, what happened in 48? Like, hold up. Uh, y'all like freaking deported 700,000 Palestinians. And then I remember distinctly, I was at a fundraiser for someone else in one of the, most concentrated Jewish parts of the district
Hmm.
at someone's home who happened to be Jewish. And we were like informally, like people were informally talking about it. And I was asking about it. And the dude said to me, yeah, we support two-state solution, but we don't support the right to return. So I was like, yo, like how? So I didn't know what the term, I know what the term right to return means now, but at then it was just like common sense, right to return. So like pretty much they were like excommunicated, kicked out of their country, and you don't support them having the right to come back. Oh, y'all are bugging out right now. Like that's bugged out, right? And so that was like while I was running. And then when I got in, immediately it was like there was a bill. Betty McCollum had a bill that I co-sponsored, where we were basically saying like, okay, we give y'all all this money, give us an accounting of how you use the money, so we know you're not using the money to detain children. This bill never got a vote in committee or markup in committee, was never going to come to the House floor. But just because I co-sponsored it, AIPAC organized 1,000 letters and calls to my office and protests outside the office where we couldn't even do our jobs. So as soon as I got in, it was like knee deep into the fight. And then one of my first letters was to the consulate to make sure they were providing vaccinations, because remember it was COVID, to
Right.
Palestinians. And so I was on their radar, not just for being in Engel, but also, with these other issues. And then I went there. I went to Israel Palestine with J Street, and it was just, it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I
Well, wait,
got to.
I want to stop you right
Yeah,
there because I actually like with the J Street trip, right? Because I remember you went on the J Street trip, and this upset many Palestinian rights advocates who felt it was like normalizing with Israel and Zionists. So, can you explain your thinking with that at that time?
yeah,
And I'm just curious if you saw that backlash, if it made you maybe reconsider it all, and then what made you
yeah,
decide to go anyway?
yeah. So probably a lot of the advocates and organizers that you're talking about, I probably didn't know them or wasn't aware of them or not in community with them at that time. Me
Mm.
personally. Maybe the Justice Democrats were, maybe my chief of staff was, but my whole mindset was, I got a large Jewish constituency, right? I need to go there because I can't be talking out my ass and I never been there, right? And so I already knew what I felt like as I was reading and talking to people and learning. Because I was fortunate. I had like Jewish Voices for Peace and If Not Now and others who were like advising me before I went there, right? And before and during the race. So I was familiar with it, right? I was familiar with the Nakba. I was familiar with we don't have two states. I was familiar with 67 borders, right? And like how because of 700,000 settlements, we don't have, 67 borders are like obsolete. So I was familiar with all that, but I wanted to go to experience it because it gives me more credibility when I talk about it coming back. If I'm talking about it without going, it's less credibility, right? And, on a personal level, Rashida's like my sister, right? I love her. And I remember when they stopped her from going to see her grandmother.
Yeah.
And I remember wanting to go on a personal level, like I'm going to go and I'm going to go see her grandmother. So anyway, so yeah, I went. And I went with J Street. And again, at this time, J Street is, in my mind, not APAC light, but like a little bit more progressive than APAC, right? So they're like the good progressive group at this time. And so I went with them. And I still give them credit, right? Because when I went, in my opinion, it wasn't no propaganda trip, right? It was, we spoke to breaking the silence, right? We went to Ramallah and spoke to leaders. We went to Hebron and visited a school and spoke to children. I was stopped at a checkpoint and I couldn't walk by. Um, we spoke to organizers. Damn, I forget the name. There's a group of like uh, uh, Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinians. Forgive me if I'm
Oh,
mislabeling
okay.
them,
One
but
of
there's
these
a
like
group working
peace
together.
where they talk.
What's the
Yeah.
name of them?
One of these they have these like peace, quote unquote peace groups where like the two
Yeah,
sides talk.
correct. So I got to meet with scholars from the whole spectrum and organizers and activists from the whole spectrum. So I really appreciated the trip, right? You can't, like when you go, I wasn't allowed to go to Gaza because we couldn't get clearance from the US or Israel. So I only got to go to West Bank, Palestine. Yo, when you go, first of all, like there's like gates and shit to get into the West Bank, right? So that's right there bugged out. There's a giant wall around the shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's burned out cars stacked on top of each other. There's abject poverty. There's checkpoints everywhere. You can't move. When you experience that, that's why Ta-Nehisi Coates talking about it now. Like I know exactly what he means, right? Like segregation, Jim Crow, and all that. It's in a black man's DNA, especially when you're a conscious black man, which I try to be. And so when I went there and experienced that, I'm like, this is crazy. And so anyway, November, my first term, I went there, uh, came back, and again, got more active, got more vocal, and and a couple of other pivot points. And I'm probably jumping around in terms of
No, that's
time.
totally fine.
Initially, like I supported the Oslo Accords, right? And then I took my name off it, right? The
Oh,
so-called peace agreement, the
mm.
normalization peace agreement, right? So, like that experience may help make that shift. For example, um, Rashida had a Nakba resolution, like right around the time of my the end of my first reelection, and I like co-sponsored it, right? And this obviously got me a bunch of backlash. So it's basically the more I learned, the more I spoke out and just became more active.
And then, I just, it's really interesting because, J Street, obviously, like for those of us who've been inside the Palestine solidarity movement, and it's been like kind of our number one thing. It's like we're very antagonistic towards J Street because it's still a Zionist organization, right? And so it's interesting that their trip for you had that impact on you, but I also think it's interesting what you're saying about being there as a Black man, and it's similar to what Ta-Nehisi Coates describes as well, which is like, yeah, you can't not see segregation when it's right in front of your face.
Right.
Um, I'm curious if, I guess moving past your trip there, obviously you come out with a different understanding. Then October 7th happens. And then I'm curious how October 7th may have shifted your view of this issue, because I think it radicalized everybody more than they already were, because it
Yeah.
really demonstrated just how genocidal the Israeli project is. But you were also still in you're still in Congress now, but you're before your primary, you were also criticized widely. Here's another tough question. Criticized widely on the left for voting for the Iron Dome. It'll come as no
Yeah.
surprise to you that I personally definitely share the criticism of voting for the Iron Dome,
Yeah.
for the fact that it's the Iron Dome is it's I know it's promoted as a defensive mechanism, but
Yeah.
it essentially shields Israel from the consequences for bombing all of its neighbors, for constantly
Yeah.
stealing land.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
guess my question is, and I think a lot of people who are watching would wonder, why did you vote for it? And has your view of the Iron Dome changed today from when you did vote for that bill?
Yeah. View has definitely changed. And at that time when I voted for it, I would say, let's say my learning and evolution is like an A to Z process. At that time when I voted for it, I was probably at like a G or H in the process, right, of learning. Um,
Yeah.
but I think even taking a step back away from that, I still have a large Jewish constituency, and I do have a responsibility to represent all constituents in my district. And if the majority of them wanted me to vote for the Iron Dome, which they did, it's part of my responsibility to vote for that. That, in addition to that, um, I, communication and propaganda is a big part of our business, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
our work. And so I didn't want to send the perception or misperception that I was okay with Jewish people being killed. Again, this is at this time of my evolution, right? So I didn't want my district to think, oh, he doesn't care if we get bombed and killed, which wasn't
Mm.
true. I don't want nobody to be killed, including Palestinians. So that was then. Of course, now, right? So first of all, on my trip, there was this moment where an Israeli soldier is giving us a tour of like we got to see the Iron Dome and what
Oh,
it was, the defense system. And during this tour, I said something like, "Yo, why don't Palestinians have an Iron Dome?" And you should have seen how this dude jumped out his skin to like attack me for even asking the question.
wow.
And I'm like, yo, they got a right to defend themselves too. You know what I'm saying? And if it's just a defense system, they need to be able to defend themselves from missiles coming, right? Like, so that was my logic. So even on that trip, I asked the question and his answer was bugged out. But fast forward to now, of course, like that, the Iron Dome is a representation and another weapon to use in continued apartheid, oppression, open air prison, occupation, and now the genocide, but ultimately the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I'm like, not only would I never vote for that again if I was still in Congress, unless there was like some like, okay, we're gonna actually have a Palestinian state, 67 borders, get like our dream. Like if our dream come true, where Palestine has a full military and everything it needs, whatever. But right now, like, no, that wouldn't be the case, because we see what's happening now, and it's freaking crazy.
If you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer-supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. Yeah, and I guess that goes back to the October 7th issue, because you mentioned, obviously, I know it was you and Cori Bush and a few others in the squad who did have this resolution, calling it, you called it a genocide in November, and I know there was a lot of pressure to, right after October 7th, condemn, denounce, basically say Israel can do whatever it wants. Tell me what was happening in Congress at that time. What kind of pressure were you getting from the AIPACs and everybody else?
It's funny. After October 7th, I actually started feeling less pressure, because it was just like, it is what it is, right? Like, so October 7th happens, and listen, of course, we condemn the killing of any innocent people. Like, that's just in any context, right? October 7th happens. I swear it was the next day, probably October 8th. There's a resolution on all of our desks condemning October 7th and just saying a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm like, okay, AIPAC had to write this resolution. Because one of the first lines was like, Hamas's unprovoked attacks. And I'm like, wait a minute, man. Like, see, so we're just going to start lying? Like, what do you mean unprovoked? They're living in apartheid. Like, there's settlement violence that year. The settlement violence was at record numbers. And there's 75 years of Nakba. Why are we saying unprovoked? I can't. And I'm like, I can't sign. I cannot support this resolution. Not only that, everyone, like president, mayors, governors, senators, everybody immediately, we stand with Israel, we stand with the Jews, right? Was the rhetoric. The other rhetoric was from Netanyahu and others, we're going to respond. They are human animals. We're cutting off food and water and electricity, and we're going to attack tomorrow. And they've been attacking ever since. So I'm like, we're going. So again, it was clear for me, like, these people are going to commit. And what was the phrase? They said, remember what Amalek did to you. So he referenced the genocide before they attacked. So I'm like, so there was no pressure. It was super clear. Like, we cannot support this, and we need something else. And thank God, Rashida and Cori, a couple, maybe 10 days or so later, introduced the ceasefire resolution. I'm like, yes, we could sign on to this, and let's go from there. And then the way things manifested locally in connection with this gave more clarity. So, there was and forgive me for giving this long answer, but I want to give you these other points. So there was a Westchester for Israel rally days after the October 7th attacks. I did not want to go, because I was not going to go to anything that was like for Israel, right? I wasn't going to go to that, because, again, I felt that we were, of course, the community was grieving, and I'm not discounting that, but we as leaders were being dishonest. We weren't having a full conversation. And so I wasn't going to go. My chief of staff, who I love, who has to make sure I'm doing the things right politically, She's like, please go, Jamal. Please go. Like, please go to support so they can't say you didn't go. So I'm like, we had a fight and we never fight because I always listen to her. But I'm like, I don't want to go, but you want me to go, I'm going to go. So we reached out to them and told them I was coming. They told me, don't come.
Wow.
There's too much anger in the community. Do not come. So I'm like, what? Did I commit the attacks, right? But this is captures how they treated me from the beginning, and then try to flip it as if I'm some anti-Semite or something. And then the next day after this rally, someone wrote an op-ed about how disappointed they was I wasn't at the rally, right? And so so we had to reach out, like, yo, they told me not to come, and they also wrote how I don't go to synagogues, and I'm never in. First of all, I have been to synagogues in my district. I have been to Shabbat dinners with rabbis. Like, I have tried to engage the community. Parts of this community, and let me be really, really clear, these are parts of the community. There are others in the community who are pro Palestine / anti-war, who are Jewish, who rather die Jamal Bowman. So I want to be really clear about that. It's not about all Jews, right?
Yeah.
But these particular synagogues and rabbis who organized and wrote letters against me, all that, they invite Richie Torres to come to my district to talk in synagogues, but don't invite me to come, right? And so, as I said before, there's a bunch of racism in our community that they need to absolutely deal with, especially when they're challenged. But let me give you a couple quick. I'm sorry, this is a long answer, but it's
no, this is actually really important. I want you to be able to say all of this. So
I want to give you some local stuff that's happening as well. So there's a group called Jews for Jamal, right? And that they still exist. And again, this is the group that ride or dies for me since I started running. But after October 7th, this group began to be fractured, right?
Okay.
And so we were on a Zoom call with the group, discussing post October 7th and discussing a bill that was going to come forward on the House floor. And the bill was going to send an additional $14 billion to Israel in the middle of them committing this genocide, right? Using white phosphorus, moving the whole country from the north to the south, all kind of stuff they were doing. And this bill, we're going to send 14. I'm like, I can't vote for this bill. So we're on this call with my so-called progressive Jewish supporters, and they told me, one person said, Jamal, we need you to vote yes on this bill. We know that it is not the moral thing to do, but we need you to do the political thing so that we can continue to support you.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, not only are y'all bugging out that if I'm in Congress and this is how I got to govern, I don't want to be in Congress. Y'all could have that shit. But I think the deeper thing that I don't think this group recognize, and many who like them recognize, if you're okay with the killing of babies in Gaza under these circumstances, you're okay with killing me and my family if you feel threatened by us. That was also my takeaway. And I was like, whatever's going to be is going to be. So it was no stress. I was clear at that time.
No, I mean, I think that's a really important point, because what this comes down to too is, and this is just my general observation, is, I mean, when you're calling a bunch of Black people anti-Semitic to try to weaponize bigotry against people who are trying to fight for their communities, and here I'm talking about you and Cori Bush. I mean, there's just it's literally just white people calling you the racist one. Like, at the end of the day. Meanwhile,
there's some Trump shit. That's some Trump shit. It's the same thing.
And there's people like Richie Torres who will toe the line. He's an AIPAC guy. And then that's the kind of Black person you have to be. Either you be that Black person or you shut up and we will kick you out. I mean, that's just how it looks to me.
And Richie does way more than toe the line. Richie bends the knee.
No, it's like he should go, honestly, serve in the Knesset.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, right? Like, yo, my man, you represent the Bronx, the whole Bronx, like one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. you tweet 1,000 times more about Israel than you do the Bronx. And the reason you do that is so you could continue to fundraise, so you could move up in the political ladder. He's the ultimate fraud, clown, fake, bend the knee elected official. And unfortunately, he is not the minority in our business. That's just how it works with the majority of people that I've got. It's just really the cowardice and the fear, and the lack of justice. Like, I grew up on, like, first, again, I'm black in America, so first of all, like, again, that's what that is, right? But like, I read about like black leaders during the civil rights movement, like Black Power movement, like Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, like people who like gave their lives for justice, who are now passing the baton to us. And we're going to look the other way and allow Palestinians to live in apartheid? Like,
Well,
it's the ultimate white supremacy, right? And it connects to what's happening in Haiti. It connects to what's been happening on the continent, in the Congo, Sudan, all of it. Like, this is white supremacy, from genocide to slavery to colonialism and then back again, right? This is what it is. And so if we ain't fighting against that, what we doing? If we're in elected office and we're not fighting against that, speaking out against that, what the hell are we doing?
That's a good question. I want to ask you this because I thought this was really interesting. Thomas Massie, who's a Republican member of Congress, he was on Tucker Carlson recently, in that whole other planet. But he said something really interesting. He said that all Republican members of Congress have an AIPAC babysitter. Which I thought was a really interesting way to put it. And he essentially meant like an Israel lobbyist who comes by, makes sure they have all their talking points. You know, did you see this bill that we are trying to get passed? You know, and on and on and on. And, you know, he said he could only speak for the Republican Party, the Republican side, because that's where he operates. But I wanted to ask you, is there something similar on the Democratic side of the aisle when it comes to the sort of like, you know, AIPAC babysitter?
Yeah, I don't know if I would. I don't know if they have a babysitter. I know from the point I was running, APAC was trying to like meet with me and, you know, build a relationship with me and work with me. And I've never had a formal meeting with APAC in my life. So you know, so I don't know. I don't have that, but I'm sure that exists. I mean, there are many Democrats who are so pro-Israel they are blind to or could care less about what's happening with Palestinians. And so just that, like, that binary us or them is the thing that destroys democracies, right? It's how we got what we have now, right? And because there's alignment on foreign policy from both parties, it's just like, it just is what it is, right? So I don't know. I just know that most Dems usually vote in support of Israel. And I know many of them don't always want to because they've told me they don't want to.
Okay.
They just don't want to deal with what I just went through, right? Like they don't want to deal with that, and they want to keep their seat and whatever. But yeah. So I don't know, but I know
you didn't have one.
AIPAC, I didn't have one, and AIPAC is an incredibly powerful lobby, as I described earlier, and as we all know.
I also want to ask you about something else that's a little bit contentious, because I don't know that we agree on this, and we might disagree, and if we do, that's fine.
So wait a minute, all the stuff we just talked about was not contentious. This is
that was like diplomatic.
That was light.
I'm going to ask you. This is about the Democratic Party. So.
Okay.
You know, another thing that I think many in the movement were upset about when it came to the squad, for example, is that, you know, with the exception of Rashida Tlaib, you all endorsed Biden, who is, you know, as far as we've watched for the last year, has been funding and facilitating genocide. And Kamala Harris is his vice president and is seen as an extension of this administration, right? And it's not like this White House is really fighting for a progressive agenda, even outside of the realm of Palestine, right? You know, it looks like they didn't lift a finger to help you, for example, or Cori Bush, as AIPAC went after you too. In some cases, some of them endorsed your opponents. So I guess my question for you is, why, after all that, why support? Why endorse them?
Well, the first answer is obvious.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.